like with anything, there are some options. There is either a recognition of we need to rein this tool in, and we need to figure out how do we be what we are, which is the stuff of the dirt, right? And I don't mean that in this like negative way, but how do we be creatures of this earth well?
Yeah.
So we're going to do that, right? And that's going to be painful. So I think they're all going to be painful, if I'm really honest, because education itself is inherently painful. And so either we willfully will decide that it will be thrust upon us, and if you want to get super churchy with it, it's like the judgment of the Lord shall fall or whatever. So I don't know, but that might be a thing. But I think that can be thrust upon us because we just are going to lack an ability to connect in ways that are important.
Do you think it has helped with churches trying to move the digital direction with good intentions, trying to be connected, trying to stay connected? I mean, it's like, I think there's a really good heart behind that, but I mean, do you think that has diminished? I mean, you worked in churches for how many years, 15 years-ish, where that wasn't really a thing, like online ministry type of stuff.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it was like, well, that's where everyone's at, so that's where we have to go. Do you see that as like a mission field? Do you see it more as like, we really need to break that?
I think that like
it's complicated. Give me your nuance. Give me what you got.
So much nuance.
There's so much nuance.
No, I think the answer is contextual. I think the answer is squishy, because I think that for a church to completely be like, we have nothing to do with anything online, I think that's unrealistic, and I think it also ignores just the major communication medium of the day.
Sure.
Right? It'd be like if the Apostle Paul had just been like, oh, I'm not going to write letters because I just don't do that, right? Yeah. So I think there's that. I think what we want to accomplish with that is going to be important. I think and I follow a couple of people on YouTube who talked about this, especially during the pandemic. And I think a lot of churches are missing the boat when they just reproduce like, hey, we're going to show you our Sunday service. That's not helpful for like online engagement. I think online engagement is going to be really helpful to create small group experiences. I think that might be a way to go. So instead of like, hey, we got the sermon and the music, because I know you're a musician and you're a worship leader and you're super talented and I love it, right?
Thanks,
but it is weird sometimes if you're at home like watching church and it's like band singing and you're like, I'm not going to sing by myself in my room.
In hindsight with the pandemic stuff, like, I mean, oh my gosh, the amount of worship leaders I know that just burnt out. And I could maybe be considered one of them. I mean, we ended up leaving the church we were at eventually, and like I stepped down from doing leading worship ministry there. But I just felt kind of, you were forced to learn 100 different things that you didn't know about digital ministry, and just hooking up various things, cameras, audio, all kinds of stuff that you already sucked at in person anyway.
Yeah.
And then it was like, oh, now redo, it's not just twice as hard to do a live stream. It's like 10 times harder.
Oh yeah.
And it always pretty much, unless you're a huge church with huge budgets and incredibly talented paid people, it's really hard to have like an incredible digital product. So I know, for our church, it was like, I feel like I worked my tail off, and my volunteers we really worked our tails off. There's kind of this rub, right? Do you as churches, do you move people into that and try to minister to them digitally, or do you try to pull them out of it? Because you can't really do both, and it's like, it's almost like
you can. I think that's the goal.
You've got all this digital stuff happening, this world that's online that people are at, and you need to meet them where they're at. But you also need to figure out how to break their addictions of these places that they're at.
Yes.
So, like, how do you do both of those things?
Yeah, no, I think...
on a spiritual level and on a life-giving level, and being people of the dirt and, like, living real life with real people. And, where does that... Where's the balancing act there? What do you...
How
do you think churches should handle that?
I think that there's this we have to start moving into and acknowledging that maybe the way we think about church is not actually how church was meant to be done in the West. Or like the way we do it in the West is not the way it's always been done. It's actually relatively recent.
So paint that out. How should it be done?
I mean, I've got ideas, but
Give us some
that's
ideas.
the beauty of the church is that it is like, I think there's an incredible flexibility when people talk about, we want to be a New Testament church. It's
Sure,
like, no,
sure.
you don't. What you want is you want certain pieces of it that are convenient and kind of like flashy. But I mean, the idea that church has to happen on Sunday morning is, I mean, one, for most of American history, that was not true or convenient or possible, especially when you think about like circuit riding Methodists. Church happened a lot of time in the evenings for the tent meetings simply because a pastor had to ride a horse 7 miles to like 5 different churches over the course of a day, right? So, so I think as we're kind of thinking now about church is like, a friend of mine, I got to know him when I was working at the middle school. So they've launched a new church, and it's really exciting what they're doing. So they meet they have house churches, and those, on week A and C, we'll say you meet in your house church, which happens anytime during the week.
Yeah.
They kind of a standardized, like, here's what you're talking about, this sort of thing. And then on weeks B and D, they have like their community gatherings. And so I think there is a real opportunity in things like this where, the digital component is, hey, instead of having like, this is our worship service on Sunday morning, what you have instead, and this is going to take more effort on the parts of teaching pastors and shifting away from maybe certain staff positions we've had before at churches into digital creators, and trusting people who are 19 or 20 years old to do the thing that they're great at, in saying, okay, so now instead of doing that, what we're going to do is this, right? So maybe, if you're a pastor at a church and I'm, we're pastoring at the same church and we're now talking about the thing for like 20 minutes, we're walking through scripture together. And then, it's like, now we're going to transition into, and then the recording, it's like a recorded thing. But then what happens then, or maybe, it's some discussion questions that are designed for you and your family or you and your small group to discuss. And then once a month, then we get together for like a communal large gathering. But the goal is to bridge people, not like church isn't just happening online, right? Because some people are like, it's not real church. And it's like, we can talk about what real church is, but whatever.
Well, I feel like I even have to make that distinction on this YouTube channel. Like, the thought has crossed my mind several times that it's like, well, this isn't church because it's called Church with Chris. Well, this isn't church. It's like, no, it's not. Like, that's like, I'm very aware that this is not church right now.
Right. Because church is people, right? And that's the thing that we've got to remember. And so I think what the goal is, and this is a thing that a lot of conversations I had during the pandemic were centered on were, okay, so long term, digitally, if people are going to engage online, because people were engaging and visiting churches first and foremost through their online services.
I met several people that visited our church, and they said, "Hey, Chris," and I was like,
"What's up? Who are you?
Hey, how are you?" And I was kind of used to that just because you're kind of on the stage every week if you're a worship leader and or a pastor, and so people just generally know who you are because you're giving announcements every week, or you're saying, "Hey, my name's Chris," but it was a different animal when people were showing up knowing your name because they had watched you for 6 weeks online before they decided to visit the church, right?
And my bridge isn't even to Sunday morning. My bridge is, how do we bridge them into small groups that are meeting in person? How do we bridge them into Celebrate Recovery? How do we bridge them into groups that are like maybe short term? How are we bridging our students into like student ministry? Like these kinds of things, but also how are we doing large communal gatherings that remind us that the church is not one age bracket, does not look all the same. And like, so again, there's no good answer because there's no template yet.